Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is measurement and how the things we seek to measure are defined or constrained in their definition often by the fact of our measuring. So it's an interesting thought how our scientific method has some inherent flaws to it, perhaps, that we get to explore in the context of our lives also. So good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Before we get started, let's just take a minute or two to get present, and let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, creating illumination and brightness and vitality in all your molecules, all your electrons, all your cells, and generating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. Now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So today we're talking about measurement. And I think we're going to talk about it first in the context, excuse me, in the context of science. Because we tend to believe that, first of all, if something's repeatable, that's the way to validate that it's real. That first, if for something to be real, it needs to be repeatable, which I'm not so sure about that. I mean, if indeed the Big Bang were true, is the Big Bang something that's repeatable? Maybe on a scale of time, maybe it is. I don't know. But just because something happens once doesn't mean it's not real, right? But in science, things are only real if you can replicate it, if you can prove it. And in situations of consciousness, that's not necessarily something that is replicable, right? We might have a moment of awakening and it may not recur, right? It doesn't mean it's not real. So let's just look at this notion of measuring and how, when we measure something, what we're looking to do, what we're doing is we're constraining the thing that we're measuring to what we're measuring for. So if we're measuring for moisture, we may be missing, we're not recognizing, we're not attending to other things that could be factors in that humidity, for example. So if we're measuring humidity and we're not measuring temperature, then we're getting an incomplete picture. And I think that this notion of measurement and how by measuring something we're collapsing it. It's kind of when we talk about the particle and wave light experiments, that when people were looking for a particle, they found a particle. When they were looking for a wave, they found a wave. And what we can do is extrapolate this notion of, we find what we're looking for, whatever it is we're measuring is what we are perceiving, or what we're constraining our perception to. We can apply that in our lives as well when we look at what are we looking for? What is the metric that we evaluate ourselves, each other, our lives, the culture? The metrics that we use for measurement collapse the picture into something that's focused on that measurement. And just by virtue of that collapse, it makes it not possible for us to be able to perceive the broader picture. So how can we apply this in our personal growth kind of thing? It's a good question. So if we're looking at our life through the lens of loss, and we can be looking at all the losses that we experienced in life, and because we're looking for losses, it collapses all the triumphs, all the joys that we may have had. And we can make a case. This is actually for any kind of belief, pretty much. We can find validation to make a case for that perspective. And that is a lot of what science does, is looking, coming up with a theory and then trying to validate it, right? Finding ways to validate that theory. And this happens also even in our culture. It's so deeply ingrained, this notion of measurement and this collapse of potentials. Like when we go to look at schools and we get graded, and the metrics that we're getting graded on are constrained, right? Like somebody, we've heard stories about how some of the most brilliant contributors to humanity have been initially misinterpreted in such a way as to believe that they were disabled in one way or another, mentally, or like I believe I recall that Einstein, for instance, couldn't add a column of numbers. And in school, and if you're in arithmetic class, then you're graded on your ability to add numbers. You're not graded on your ability to conceptualize mathematical relationships or interrelationships. And so there's a collapse of the potentials, or even the potentials for perception, when we get locked into certain metrics. There are many folks who do not thrive in a conventional education system who are absolutely brilliant. We know of so many inventors and change makers who couldn't hack it in school, who dropped out of school, because the metrics of that system were really a failure. They weren't the failure. The metrics were the failure, because it failed to recognize their brilliance, their uniqueness, their potential. So when we look at ourselves, I think it's important, ourselves and others, to look or to be aware of what are the metrics that we're using to make our evaluations. What when we look at our lives, what is the measure that we are applying? What is, it's another way of saying, what's the lens we're looking through? And the more this idea of metrics kind of makes our observation more simple, not more accurate. It makes it simple because we're looking for a specific thing, but not more accurate because in looking for that that one particular thing, we're shielding out all this other information, or sorting out or ignoring all this other information. So the reason for this conversation is to be looking at a shift of paradigm. What does it look like to be a more comprehensive observer, a more comprehensive witness, rather than trying to hone things down into a particular metric? Because then if we take that metric, it's kind of a function of our domination control culture. It's a function of, and maybe a symptom of, where we then take that metric and apply it to determine value. And we do that with human beings also, right? In the workplace, in the school environment, in social contexts. And then we assign worth, for instance, to people and say this person's worth more than that person. And that actually translates to dollars and cents. For instance, if you look at our insurance system, right? Different people are insured at different rates based on the metrics that are in some respect arbitrary, because the metrics are not the whole picture. They're one section of a big picture. And when we're talking about a shift of paradigm, where this conversation is going is to be looking at systems rather than mechanics or isolated elements. Because while we can learn something about something in isolation, we're not recognizing its interaction and dependence and interdependence on a greater system. And this is part of the notion that that the clockwork universe kind of thing, where there are just gears in motion, and each thing is it's mechanical rather than systematic or systemic. By shifting our notion from mechanistic function, then we start to recognize the interconnectedness of things. So, for instance, in our bodies, from the mechanistic point of view, if we have an issue with our heart, we're going to go in and fix the heart. From a holistic or a systematic, system-based system, we're going to look at what are the interactions that are impacting the health of the heart. what is producing that symptom. Yes, there may be interventions that are necessary and required to take care of the urgent health of the heart, but the heart is part of a whole system. And there are all kinds of factors to that, right? There's the emotional factor, which is not really part of medical consideration at all. There's the diet. There's the interaction of all the other organs and how more stress might be placed on the heart because of something else happening in the system. And so when we're just this is what it's a good example of the limitation of measurements. When we're just measuring the heart, we're not present to all the other factors that are affecting that heart and therefore that metric. So the metric is not the whole picture. And one of the things that I think we do pretty regularly is mistake the map for the territory. That's an NLP distinction. The map is not the territory. In other words, you may have a map that shows you all the roads, but it's not the actual roads. And what happens is when we get data, we interact with the data rather than the source of the data. Oh, Rosalind says, I can hear the birds outside your window. Guess what, Rosalind? They're not outside my window. They are in a box right next to my desk. So I'm going to show you the birds. Come here. I know they're hungry. I came out of my door the other day and they were on the ground and they were dying and I saved them. So they're giving us a concert. They've been around for a couple of days and they're eating well. One of them has an injured foot because they fell more than 12 feet, but they seem to be pretty happy. And how nice to have birds making bird sounds inside the house, right? So that's the new babies. And you can see them better. I think they're sparrows. See, you can see. Aren't they adorable? So Sue says, interesting topic, thinking about how to move through our day. Awesome birds, aren't they? They're just amazing. So they should be able to fly within maybe a week and a half even. And maybe they'll fly away. Or maybe they won't. We'll see what happens. I'm going to put them back in their box. Go ahead, baby. So this idea of measurement, we have grown up in it. We have been measured. We have been told that we're an A student or a C student, or that our IQ is a certain number, or Rosalind says, I love them, the birds. Yeah, what's not to love, right? They're pretty amazing. So we've been measured and packaged, you know, in so many ways. We're measured by our income. We're measured by our degrees, by our achievements. And with all these measures, what they are, it can make certain information accessible, no doubt. But at the same time, what we're doing with these measures is we're collapsing potential. If I've been told going through school that I'm a C student, and I take that on as an identity, what does that mean for what I might accomplish in life? If I believe I'm barely average, then I might, if I believed it, limit the things that I might try to do, the things that I might try to accomplish. I might believe myself incapable of achieving certain things because this label, this measure, this metric was imposed upon me, right? So I think it's important for us as ourselves to be noticing what kinds of constraints and beliefs and measures and that we've imposed on ourselves. There's a story, I don't know if it's a real story or not, but it's a story about how to train fleas. I don't know if you've ever heard of a flea circus, and I don't know if there was ever such a real thing, but how to train fleas is you put them in a jar, you put a lid on the jar. And when the fleas jump, they hit their heads on the jar. And they do it enough that at some point they jump just high enough that they don't hit the lid. And then you can take the lid off the jar and the fleas don't jump out because they've been trained to just jump below the lid. And I think that that's something that so many of us live with, that we have been trained into limitations. We have been trained into jumping only so high. And it's important that we allow ourselves to question those metrics that we have adopted. They may have been externally imposed, but what happens is that we then adopt them and make them our reality. So we may have been told we're stupid. And then because we were hypnotized into that belief, because we were told over and over maybe that we were stupid, then we start believing that we're stupid rather than that we have the capability to do something beyond that or be something beyond that identifier. So the idea here, if you want to take away for today, is that when we measure something, we're collapsing possibility. It's kind of like Schrodinger's cat, where there's a cat in a box, and before the box is open, you don't know. The cat could be alive, the cat could be dead, the cat could be anywhere in between in the box. It's when you open the box that then the cat becomes either alive or dead. It's the same with the double slit experiment for light waves and particles. When you're observing it, it's one or the other, depending upon intention, essentially, depending on what you're looking for. And our measurements of ourselves, and especially the ones that we have received as an identity, are collapsing our potentials. So the invitation is to see if you can step outside of the confinement of those metrics. One of the ways that we measure ourselves is our age, right? Like we have all kinds of cultural ideas about age. It's a box, well, I'm so old, or I'm not old enough, right? It cracks me up. I have a nephew who's, I think he's going to be 20, I think he's 26. And he was telling me how old he is, how old he's feeling. I'm so old. It's a metric, right? And when we use those metrics, it collapses possibility and potential. I said to him, honey, You can't be old because I'm not. So how does that work? You know, like let's let's open up our potentials. Let's open up our possibilities in our lives to what's available to us without those metrics. And the thing is that those metrics are often really invisible. So it takes some self-searching. You know, I can't do that because of this. Well, look at the because of this. And there may be some kind of hidden metric there that is going to give you entree into dissolving some kind of constraining belief. So, anyway, that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it is inspiring, really inspiring to have the opportunity to noodle through some of these ideas and perspectives on what it is to be human. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. So much love to you. Until next time.